Hello everyone. Today we're going to be discussing 3 unsolved murders from women and young girls across Canada. From a young mother whose body was found in the Toronto harbourfront, to yet another woman whose body was found in a farmer's field near Edmonton, to a little girl who disappeared while riding her bike near her home. As I said, all 3 of these cases are unsolved, meaning there are 3 families without answers and 3 women without justice. 22-year-old Kasandra Bolduc, who also went by Candy, was born January 10th of 1991 and was from Elliott Lake, Ontario, a small town located midway between Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury. Kasandra was born to her mother Colleen Dunn and her father Leanne Benwell. She would also go on to attend Elliott Lake Secondary School. Colleen described her daughter as a beautiful girl with a very good heart. As a kid, Kasandra was mainly raised by her grandfather in Elliott Lake, and she would often rescue animals and bring them home with her. Her best friend Samantha Watts would also recount a time that they rescued an injured rabbit and kept it as a pet. Samantha would go on to tell the Toronto Star that Kasandra just wanted to be friends with everyone, but people took advantage of her because she was a nice girl, and she had a hard time with that. When Kasandra was just 18 years old, she would give birth to her daughter. But sadly, Kasandra would become addicted to crack and would lose custody of her daughter. According to a Facebook post, she wrote, quote, "You call grandma mom, you just want a mommy, I understand. But the day you know I am your mom will be the best day of my life. I don't think I'd be alive right now if you didn't exist." End quote. Kasandra would attempt to get clean, however, not long after that, her grandfather would sadly pass away, which would send her into an even darker place mentally. As I said, her grandfather had essentially raised her, so this was a huge loss for her. And such a tragic thing happening around someone who is dealing with addiction and trying to get clean, it sadly can cause someone like that to spiral back into that addiction, maybe even deeper. After this, Kasandra would decide to up and move to Toronto for a fresh start. Despite moving 5.5 hours away from her home, her friends, and her family, Kasandra always stayed in contact with everyone over social media. In August of 2011, she even traveled and surprised her best friend at her daughter's birthday, and she brought a gift for her. But Toronto didn't seem to be all it was chalked up to be for Kasandra. Samantha saying, quote, "She told me that things weren't going good, and that she'd gotten involved with some bad people, and that she was scared." End quote. Colleen also talked to her daughter very regularly, either over the phone or over Facebook, but suddenly those messages would stop in the fall of 2012. Her last known contact with family being September 28th of 2012. This sudden drop in contact worried Colleen, however, those closest to her kept telling her that, maybe Kasandra just needed some space and that she would eventually reach back out. Now, despite going completely radio silent for everyone in her life, on November 9th, Kassandra's Facebook profile would be updated, which seems to be the last known activity on there. As the months passed, family and friends continued to try to figure out where she was, even posting on her Facebook telling her to contact someone and sending her well wishes. But despite this, no one was getting any response. If Kasandra was out there and had access to her Facebook, you'd think seeing, all of these messages on her Facebook would make her at least contact someone to tell them like, hey, I'm fine, stop trying to find me or leave me alone. But no, not one message was received by anyone. Deep down, Colleen knew that there was something very wrong going on here. And so Kasandra would finally be reported missing 4.5 months later on February 13th of 2013. 3 months later, on May 22nd, a body would be found wrapped in a plastic garbage bag off the shore of Lake Ontario at the foot of Yonge Street in Toronto. As you can see by Google Maps, this means that the body washed into this area near Queens Quay West and Yonge Street, where there's a ferry terminal as well as boat docks. And sadly, this body would eventually be identified as 22-year-old Kasandra Bolduc. Toronto police would say that her death was suspicious, however, at that point, they hadn't ruled it a homicide. But what else could it be? It's not like she would have wrapped herself in a garbage bag and threw herself into Lake Ontario. It wasn't like she had just been found in the water, like she had drowned or something, possibly fell in and drowned. She was in a garbage bag. In a 2015 article, Detective Greg Forstall would say that police had exhausted all leads at this point, but they hadn't given up. They would reveal that they believed Kasandra had been involved with a high-risk lifestyle in the drug and sex trade of Toronto, and she had admittedly been using crack cocaine. They were also undetermined how long Kasandra had been in the lake. Due to it being winter, the waters were very cold, so it could have preserved her body for a lot longer than in the summer. There were also a lot of rumors swirling around that she had been dismembered, however, police disputed that. Eventually, police would reveal that they believed Kasandra had been dumped in the lake sometime before Christmas that year, but it could have been anywhere between November of 2012 to May of 2013. But what really bothered me as well is that they were calling it an incident. You know, she just incidentally got put in the lake. Not really how it works, but hey. More information would also come out around the timeline before her body was discovered. As I said, she was last in contact with family around September of 2012. However, her Facebook photo was updated on November 9th. But it would turn out that a couple weeks later, on November 17th, Kasandra was arrested for a minor offense which hasn't been disclosed. So if she was still alive and well through September, October, and then November, why wasn't she in contact with family, especially when people were posting on her Facebook asking her where she was? And then why was her Facebook photo updated and then she was arrested, but she wasn't responding to anyone? It's very strange. I also really wonder what she was arrested for. That may hold answers that police just aren't revealing. Colleen would tell CBC, quote, "My daughter does not deserve to end up in a bag in a lake," end quote. Another relative saying, quote, "She didn't put herself in that bag, and she didn't jump in the lake. In my mind, she was stolen, and someone did that to her. All I can do is wait and hope and pray that part of her life gets justice," end quote. On top of that, there are a lot of rumors and theories about what happened to Kasandra. There's been rumors that she was beaten severely by another woman, that someone was following her in a car, and that police wanted to speak with a man whose name friends did not recognize. There's also rumors that Kasandra was homeless and that she often hung around in the Moss Park area of Toronto, which is a rough area frequented by sex workers just east of the Eaton Centre. Toronto street pastor Doug Johnson Hatlem has said sources who knew Kasandra described her as hanging around a housing complex at 251 Sherbourne Street, which is also near the Moss Park area. It's also only 2.5 kilometers from where her body was found. Kasandra was also known to frequent the Shutter and Jarvis Street area.
She was one of a kind. She was always laughing and smiling and curious about everything.
It's how Kasandra Bolduc will be remembered by family, a bright little girl whose life ended too soon as a 23-year-old woman. Police announced today Bolduc's body was found in Lake Ontario at the end of May. She had been wrapped in plastic. A relative who didn't want to be identified says Bolduc had been hanging around with gangs.
She was really vulnerable and gullible and easily influenced.
After moving from Elliott Lake, those who knew her here say she got involved with Toronto sex trade. Kasandra Bolduc was known to frequent this neighborhood around Sherbourne and Dundas. Many in the area that we have talked to say they knew her well, but those same people say they've never been approached by police for information. Gabriel Jacobs says she came to his apartment several times with a man who claimed to be her boyfriend. The last time he saw her was in April.
When people come here, they come here to smoke dope. When he spoke, she listened. You know, when it was time to go, then they left.
Bolduc was reported missing in February. Her body recovered in May. But police only went public with details of the case today. They say they've been following leads for months. Doug Johnson Hatlem, who has worked on the streets for decades, says news of her death should have been made public sooner.
There's a lot of people on the streets that need to know what happened, that want to know what happened, that want to know about important issues of violence and death that affect their lives as well.
The police don't care. It's like you said, just another crackhead gone.
For family, Bolduc was anything but. She was a mother, a daughter, and a sister.
I needed to let the world know that that's not who she was. And she was a beautiful person, and she didn't deserve to die.
When Doug was interviewed by CBC, he said, quote, "Toronto seems like a bit of a place, a sanctuary for anonymity, for getting away from whatever hard situation you're in and starting a new life. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be that kind of place for her. She's either a pawn in some larger sting that they won't say publicly what's happening, or like in so many cases across Canada, police didn't do their jobs properly. If a wealthy white man disappears or turns up missing in a bag, that's something police take seriously. If someone who's female, who's poor, who's in the sex trade, we place the value in society on different forms of human life." End quote. Now, what Doug said there is something that I hear echoed in a lot of my comment section as we continue to talk about these cases. And I truly, truly, truly hope that is not what is happening here. I truly hope it isn't. But unfortunately, there is a pattern there seems to be across Canada, especially with just things not being investigated properly, especially decades ago. We have seen so many cases that seem like they may have been able to be solved if just a little more effort may have been put in. Now, despite Kasandra's lifestyle choices, which again often seem to kind of impact how well a case seems to be investigated, as Pastor Doug said, Toronto police would completely dispute that, saying, quote, "Her lifestyle has no bearing on our investigation whatsoever. We consider every death we hold in the highest regards, and we put every effort in furthering investigations to their fullest. Our investigative avenues have stalled. We need tips. As small as the information might seem, we would be very grateful." End quote. In my opinion, something drastic happened to Kasandra that fall when she dropped off the face of the earth, when she completely stopped contacting anyone. And it makes me wonder if she possibly could have been human trafficked. Was she kidnapped and held somewhere for a period of time? And I think if we knew what she was arrested for, it might answer some of those questions. Could she have been arrested for prostitution? Could she have been arrested for drugs? Because we often see people in these situations, getting put back out on the streets and stuff to go make more money for certain individuals, and then they get arrested. So could she have been being held somewhere where she couldn't contact anyone? And then she got arrested because they were forcing her to sell herself. Again, we don't know what the charge is, so that's just all speculative. But that would make sense to me more so how she could still be alive for months after she stopped contacting anyone. It makes me wonder then, if she was being held somewhere and not allowed to contact anyone, could she have been being drugged? Could she have accidentally OD'd, and that's why they disposed of her in the lake, just to get rid of her? Or could she have also been murdered and then thrown in that lake? But in my opinion, in any of these scenarios, that means that there are people walking these very streets right now that I walk that did something to Kasandra, and they have never been caught. And that is absolutely terrifying. How many more women could be out there that are in this exact same situation right now? What's also really concerning to me is that after 2013, the news articles seem to kind of just drop off. It's like no one is talking about Kasandra and no one is trying to solve her case still. But she still hasn't gotten justice. There is still a possible killer walking our streets, and her young daughter is growing up not knowing what happened to her mother. Kasandra was so young. She had such opportunity to better her life and make a change. And all of that was taken from her. Let's take one more good look at Kasandra because it may lead to answers. Kasandra was known to have a heart tattoo between the thumb and an index finger on her left hand with a poorly drawn K in it. She also had a tattoo on her right abdomen and a tattoo on her upper thigh. If you recognize any of these tattoos or may know what happened to Kasandra, please contact the local police. I'll have it down below. 27-year-old Leanne Benwell was born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, as a Salt River First Nation woman to her mother Connie and her father Larry, and would have 3 brothers. She was described as a beautiful young lady with a big heart who loved her family. Around 2001, Leanne would move to Edmonton, Alberta, with big dreams of starting college and becoming a hairdresser. She began living there with her boyfriend, Robbie Moen, at his grandmother Kait Hamilton's home. Leanne would also go on to have 2 young daughters who she was extremely proud of. Despite coming from a good family, Leanne would eventually be taken down a bad path, leading her to homelessness and working in the Edmonton sex trade. However, Connie would insist that Leanne never drank. She didn't like getting blacked out because she always wanted to be aware of her surroundings. But despite the dark path that Leanne was being led down, she would always check on her daughters to see if they were okay and if they needed anything. She was said to give what she could to her girls. In the summer of 2006, Leanne went to visit her 80-year-old grandmother, Elizabeth. While there, she promised her that she was going to leave the drugs behind and come back home. Her grandmother would beg her not to go back to Edmonton, Leanne saying, quote, "Grandma, I'll go back once more. Then I'll come back and I'll stay with you." End quote. March 12th of 2007, Connie would last see her daughter when she stopped by to pick up some laundry. During this visit, Leanne had a cut on the bridge of her nose and said a man had beaten her. After that, she left with her boyfriend. A few days later, on March 24th, Leanne would last be seen by her boyfriend Robbie as he left their home near 162nd Street and 104th Avenue to go attend an appointment. However, when he returned, Leanne was nowhere to be found. Robbie's uncle would allegedly tell him that Leanne had left in a taxi just 15 minutes prior. Later in the day, Leanne would allegedly call Robbie and tell him that she was downtown. After this, she would never be heard from again. Leanne wouldn't be reported missing until nearly a month later on April 15th. And not by her boyfriend Robbie or his family, but by her mother Connie, after she hadn't heard from her daughter or gotten in contact with her for a long period of time. And months would pass without answers. Until June 21st, when Wetaskiwin RCMP received a call about human remains being found in a farmer's field 71 kilometers south of Edmonton in the remote area of Wetaskiwin. The body was said to be found in a stand of trees along a dirt road intersecting Highway 795. This body would be identified a couple weeks later as 27-year-old Leanne Benwell. Now, at first, police would rule Leanne's death as a homicide. However, they wouldn't reveal her cause of death. A couple years prior, in 2005, they had also made known they suspected one or more serial killers may be responsible for all of the sex workers going missing in the area. At that point, since 1988, more than 14 women's bodies had been found in the rural areas outside of Edmonton, which would launch a group called Project Care to look into them, which is something that we have talked about quite often on this channel. I did a video called Is There a Serial Killer in Edmonton or something around those lines. I'll have it up here if you want to go watch it. I've done another case as well of another young woman who went missing in the area near Edmonton, just south of Edmonton, and who was also found in a farmer's field. That case is also not solved. There are so many of them, and it's just an odd pattern in my opinion. I definitely believe that there's something more going on there. I definitely recommend going and checking those cases out as well if you haven't seen them. But despite all of this, for some reason in 2012, police would close Leanne's case after a medical examiner apparently determined that her death wasn't criminal in nature. However, her family, along with me, strongly disagrees with this ruling. After not hearing from the police for more than a year and a half, her mother Connie would say, quote, "My daughter wouldn't just go and lay in some farmer's field and die like that. That's stupid. I don't think that the police are doing what they have to do to locate these people or work with families. Let people know where you're at. Just let them know you haven't forgotten about them. That's a lot of families in limbo." End quote. Connie would go years begging the police to reopen her daughter's case. And despite it being allegedly closed, police refused to release any documents relating to the case. And why? If the case is closed, release all of that information and let other people do with it what they want to do. Let other people investigate it. Let the family hire a private investigator then to do their own work if the police don't care about it. I don't understand why they would do something like this, unless there's something in those documents that they don't want out there. In early articles, Connie would say that she believed that her daughter's death may have been related to drugs. But as I've said, it is extremely scary how many women involved in the sex trade or just in and around Edmonton go missing and are found in farmers' fields. That's why they made a whole task force called the Care Team to investigate all of these, because there's one too many. Police have even said back in the day that they believe there was a serial killer. A serial killer actually was arrested in that area, yet there are still multiple other cases that aren't solved. Now, could it simply just be multiple cases of, people involved in the drug scene or sex trade who may overdose and then, people panic and are just dropping them in these fields? Or could there have been another serial killer active in that area? Leanne's daughters were only around 4 years old and 18 months old when she was murdered. They deserve to know why they're growing up without their mother. Leanne deserves justice. She shouldn't have just been thrown in that field and disregarded like that. Leanne was described as an Indigenous woman standing 5 foot 6 inches tall, around 115 pounds, with a slender build and shoulder-length black hair. She had the words vodka, love, and Aussie tattooed on her body. 8-year-old Mindy Tran was born in April of 1986 to her parents Annie and Johnny, who left Vietnam in 1979 and came to Canada seeking peace and a better life. Mindy was described as a special little girl who enjoyed reading, swimming, riding her bike, being with her father, helping her mom bake cookies, and going to McDonald's with her big sister Mimi. Mindy was said to be so smart that she read 100 books during first grade and 240 books in second grade.
Sing the song.
16.
Annie, how did you say it? Sing?
Sing, Yum sing. Yum sing.
Oh, okay.
Drink a beer, right?
Hello. Hello.
Can you still?
Wow. Quit screaming. I don't know if we'll have another one. I don't know how many years.
The family settled in a quiet street in the Rutland area of Kelowna, British Columbia. a city northeast of Vancouver in the Okanagan Valley, on the eastern shore of Okanagan Lake, surrounded by provincial parks, pine forest, vineyards, orchards, and mountains. On August 17th of 1994, Mindy would last be seen by school friends as she rode her pink bike up and down her street. She was said to be riding her bike in circles a couple houses down from her home near where her best friend, Charmaine Mugford, lived. She was also said to knock on the Mugfords' door, however, they were not home, so she continued riding her bike as she waited for her best friend to come home and join her. But not long after that, Mindy's pink bike would end up being found on the Mugfords' front lawn. And Mindy was nowhere to be found. For 4 days straight, police would search for the missing little girl along with hundreds of volunteers. Her family would also go on the news pleading for answers.
If who had Mindy can hear me now, put yourself in my position. If you lost your child who you love so much, how would you feel in your heart, and what would you do?
Now, 2 witnesses would end up coming forward claiming to have seen a man named Sharon Murrin carrying a suitcase down the street on the evening Mindy disappeared. Shannon Murrin was a man with a lengthy criminal history who was living at the Mugfords' home, the same home where Mindy had knocked on the door before she disappeared and where her bike would be found in the lawn. At the time, Sharon had 2 assault convictions, multiple assault charges, a weapons charge, and a robbery conviction. Police would interview Sharon on August 18th, which was the day after Mindy went missing. However, he seemed to have an alibi at the time. Then sadly, on October 11th, a psychic tip would lead police to Mindy's partially clothed body being found in a shallow grave in Mission Creek Park, about a kilometer away from where she was last seen near home. Her cause of death would end up being ruled as strangulation. 3 hairs would also be found inside of Mindy's underwear, however, the DNA results were inconclusive. Mindy's funeral would end up being held in Kelowna, and more than 1,000 people would attend, including those who searched for her.
This morning, nearly 1,000 people attended a memorial service for the 8-year-old girl whose body was found in a Kelowna park almost 2 months after she was abducted. Barry McDivitt was there today.
They have come to say goodbye to a little girl that most have never met, but everyone feels they know. People began lining up for Mindy Tran's memorial service hours before it got underway.
I think it's nice. I think it's a good show of support, definitely.
Some live in Mindy's neighborhood. Others had helped search for her. Police officers who are determined to catch Mindy's killer were there, as were all the teachers from the school she attended. There were also ordinary people who came for the most personal of reasons.
Because we're grieving, and I personally have a 9-year-old girl too that I have to watch all the time now. And it's a very difficult situation where we're stuck with the fact that we're all grieving. I don't know what else to say.
It's gonna be tough, yeah.
Many mourners commented on how the tragedy has affected everyone who lives in the city.
It pulls the community together in a way that is really difficult to say, but I think it glues us together, and it makes us aware of the many aches and the hurts and the pains that so many people go through.
Even though there was room for over 900 people inside, the crowd was so large that it spilled onto the parking lot. The congregation listened to a children's choir and heard a number of adults who knew Mindy well try to make some sense out of her death.
When we experience a violent attack on innocence, a violent attack on helplessness, a violent attack on childhood.
In 1979, Johnny, Annie, and Mimi left Vietnam and came to Canada, seeking a better life for themselves and a more secure future for their children. In April of 1986, a baby was born into the family. This special little girl was Mindy, and each day of her life, she brought the family joy and happiness.
And with each new day, I watched Mindy grow from a little seed into a beautiful little flower.
After the service, as people filed outside, they listened to Mindy's favorite song, taken from the movie Aladdin. Many people stopped to look at posters and poems created by school children in honor of Mindy.
Everyone is invited to stay. There is food for everyone.
Then the Tran family and a few close friends made their final trip with Mindy to the cemetery for a private burial ceremony.
Now, some way, somehow, some of Shannon's friends seem to find out, apparently because police told them, allegedly, that Shannon was the prime suspect in Mindy's murder. These friends would then apparently beat Shannon in his apartment into a confession. They then took Shannon to Mindy's grave and continued to beat him to the point that they almost killed him. He would spend 11 days in the hospital. Now, if he 100% did this, you know what? A little vigilante justice I'm not always opposed of. Some people may disagree, but I feel like there'll be people agreeing with me in the comment section that if their, 8-year-old daughter was murdered, that they wouldn't be opposed to, maybe a small mob beating the shit out of that person. But again, he was innocent until proven guilty at this point, which is, I think, where a bit of the issue may lie here, especially once I tell you what happens. Because in the end, Shannon would be eventually taken to trial for murder, although it seemed to take place a long, long time to do so. And there were also multiple newspaper articles written about how police had botched this investigation. During the trial, it would be revealed that the evening Mindy disappeared, the Mugfords had gone out to dinner at Uncle Willie's restaurant around 6 p.m. Now, before they left, they attempted to wake Shannon so that he could go along with them. However, he had been drinking that evening and appeared to be in a deep sleep on the couch. Now, the family had plans to be home by 7:25 p.m. specifically because they had family members from Newfoundland that often called them at 7:30, so they wanted to be home to receive that phone call. Meaning that if Shannon had done something to Mindy, he only had about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes to do whatever he needed to do, get rid of her body, and then return home as if, nothing was wrong. Although I'm not really sure if he was home when they returned home. He seemed to have had an alibi, though, from what articles said. On top of that, that suitcase that the two witnesses seen Shannon dragging around that evening has never been found. Another witness would actually speak at the trial, claiming that Shannon had confessed to him. Keep in mind, this witness was a jailhouse informant who claimed that he'd helped police get, multiple other convictions and confessions from other inmates. So essentially, I guess, like a rat. This informant claimed that Shannon told him, quote, "I know what I've done, but it would kill my folks if I confessed. I hate myself and feel I should unalive myself. I killed her, but nobody can prove it without my help." End quote. Now, I don't know how much weight to put on a jailhouse informant. I mean, sometimes these people are just doing this and making things up just to either get a day out of prison because, if they go along with this and say, oh, this guy told me this, they get to leave the prison and have basically like a day trip out, which is something they don't get to do. Some prisoners will do this just to simply get a day trip, which is pretty fucked up, but also I guess they have nothing else to do. On top of that, they could also just be doing this to get maybe some perks from police. Maybe they'll get some commissary, or they might get a deal on their sentence. Maybe they'll get out a month earlier. You don't know. So it's really hard to put a lot of weight on confessions like this. However, some people, take that statement that allegedly happened, this hearsay, and say that, he confessed. So he definitely must have done it on top of all of these other circumstances. She went and knocked on his door. No one else was home. He easily could have, opened the door, told her to come inside, and done something to her. I'm pretty sure, though, that house was searched and they didn't find anything, or else it would have been in this trial. But if you know differently, let me know down below. Because in the end, after a 7-month-long trial, Shannon would end up being found not guilty and acquitted of all charges. He would also be suspected in newspapers of another little girl who would end up going missing and was found brutally murdered. She was essayed. It was completely awful what happened to this other little girl. But it seems like in the end, a complete other man was charged with her murder. Mindy's death would impact a lot of people. Her sister Mimi even changed her plans to be a nurse and instead moved to Mexico to teach elementary school. Mindy's first grade teacher would also speak with the media about her experience with the little girl.
She was sweet and gentle. She was well-mannered, sensitive, and appreciative. She was an excellent student who always tried to do her best. She loved art and would draw delightful pictures at every opportunity.
The issue in the end here is, was this a botched police investigation and Shannon was the killer? I mean, he seemed to have had the opportunity to, but was there a motive there? Just because someone, gets into bar fights or I guess robs somewhere, we don't really know the details of his previous charges, but just because someone, is attacking adults doesn't immediately mean they're going to be a PDF file. But I also think, someone with charges like that could lead them to doing something maybe more drastic, especially if he was drunk. I've covered other cases before where PDF files, though specifically, have gotten drunk and then kidnapped little girls in, moments of opportunity when they're just walking by at that awfully wrong point in time. However, in those cases, these individuals were like hardcore PDF files. In one of the cases I covered from Toronto, the guy was actually watching, CP right before he did it. He was watching it all day, amping himself up before he committed the crime. Whereas, it seems like this might have just been a drunk with, a lot of charges for maybe bar fights or I don't know, something. We don't know the charges, obviously, but you know where I'm going here. He might not have been a great person, but he also might not have been a PDF file. Then again, there seem to be a lot of people who believe that Shannon is guilty in this and that this was just a botched police investigation. Maybe very much so Casey Anthony-esque, where like everyone knows, or at least 99.9% feel that this person is responsible. However, due to the police and their horrible investigating skills, and then, the trial just not going in their favor, that this person is let out even though they're guilty. But if Shannon didn't kill her, then who did? Because that person may still be walking the streets. Who else would have had the opportunity to? What I do know is that it's been decades and this little girl has not gotten any answers. Her family has never gotten any peace. Who did this to Kasandra, Leanne, and Mindy? And why are their killers still walking our streets after all this time? If you have any information on what happened to these two young women and that precious little girl, please contact the authorities associated with the case. Please give these families closure and please give justice to these victims. Also, what do you all think happened in these 3 cases? Comment down below and I'll be down there chatting with you all about them. My heart goes out to all 3 of these families. I truly hope you eventually get answers. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.